Hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for Zooming in today. I really appreciate all the time you're taking out of your schedules to come and listen to me. Secondly, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak. I've seen that you've had such a wonderful group of speakers before, and I'm honoured to be in their company and to have a chat with you all today about my own research. So I'm Premeet, or Pre, and I'm a second-year PhD student from the University of Sydney in Australia. In my presentation today, I'll be giving you all a little bit of insight into my own research, which investigates meaningful and transgressive play experiences in games, focusing particularly on the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. So I'll start with a little bit of background information about me. My undergrad at Sydney was in education, so I have the privilege of being a high school English and ancient history teacher. I also really love games, both digital and non-digital, and was lucky enough to do my honours in media and communications at Sydney as well. As a result of this varied education, my PhD research is inherently interdisciplinary, and even though I'm broadly focused on exploring the modern resurgence and appeal of D&D, I'm also very interested in the ways in which meaning is made and experienced through games and play, and how we can use this to inform our teaching pedagogies and learning practices. So, before I explore the main theoretical foundations that underpin my PhD research, I'd love to take this time to just briefly explain and show to you what my core case study D&D is, and recap how D&D's representation has changed over the years, which was the main focus of my honours research. So, put simply, D&D is a game where groups of players usually meet in person to tell deep stories and play make-believe with their friends, sometimes using dice rolls to determine the outcome of their actions. The game was originally created in 1974 by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, almost 50 years ago now, but has experienced a massive modern resurgence in play. The game even had its biggest year ever during the pandemic last year, with sales jumping 33%. However, the representation and reception of D&D and its players has changed quite a bit over its lifetime. So this first video that I'm going to show you was recorded by the BBC in 1980 for a documentary exploring D&D players. I think it sort of gives you a feel of how D&D play and players were represented and viewed by the general public at that time.
Okay, he's trying to get out.
This one, he can strike a blow as he's retreating.
Yeah. Right. 19.
He's hit it, he's hit it. That one slumps to the ground.
Right.
And it's still your initiative, so are there any...
Yeah, my cleric will come forward with his holy symbol in his hand and command them, in the name of all that's good and just, to return and repent their evil ways.
Okay, roll 2 six-sided dice.
12.
Yes, they all fall back. All those figures retreat and seem to be drawing away from your holy symbol.
So this second video I'm going to show you is taken from a Critical Role live show in 2019. Critical Role are arguably one of the most successful actual play D&D groups, who have been streaming their game almost weekly for the last 6 years. They even raised $11.3 million on Kickstarter to create an animated series based on the adventures of their D&D campaign, which was co-opted by Amazon Prime and will air later this year.
Oh my God. That is a lot of make-believe damage. Oh my God.
77 and 9 is 86.
How do you want to do this?
As I watch my comrades deal an incredible amount of damage to this, I pull out my great axe and I swing just below his kneecap, cutting him down to 1. I see his face come low and I'm like, no one fucks with Vox Machina.
So as you've just seen, both of these videos give us a little snippet into not only the appeal of D&D play, but the representation of D&D players both past and present, which is broadly what my honours research was focused on exploring. So throughout my honours research, I found that D&D's modern resurgence and appeal was being influenced by 3 key factors. Firstly, the increased positive media representations. Secondly, the reduction of associated stigma with the game and its players. And thirdly, the impact of convergence culture on play and consumption of the game. While these factors built a solid foundational understanding of the game's current resurgence and increased popularity, I was really interested in continuing to explore the meaningful play moments experienced in D&D throughout my PhD. So, particular moments in games have the ability to impact how people navigate, reflect on, and make sense of their lives and worlds. From personal experience, Undertale's commentary on moral complicity, Final Fantasy VII's emotional exploration of environmental sustainability, and the unexpected tragic death of my first created character in a D&D game have all been profound catalysts for my own implicit learning, self-reflection, and changed attitudes towards similar real-life experiences and events. They've been meaningful and have taught me things both inside the game but beyond it as well. In game studies, there is a widely accepted definition of what constitutes meaningful play of a game. This definition being the one put forth by Katie Sarlin and Eric Zimmerman in their 2004 book, Rules of Play: Game Design Fundamentals. From their game design perspective, they describe meaningful play as the relationship between player action and system outcome, which must be both discernible and integrated into the larger context of the game. What this definition essentially gets at is that any action taken by a player that has a directly related consequence in-game is considered meaningful. So some examples that adhere to this definition can vary from rolling the dice in D&D to see if you hit the dragon, pushing a specific combination of buttons to enact a fatality in Mortal Kombat, or choosing how the story ends in The Walking Dead. When utilizing this definition of meaningful play in our work, we always view meaningful play from the perspective of the game designer and not the player. We understand that taking actions which lead to certain outcomes within the game context or environment is inherently meaningful. But what about the moments that happen outside of this context? What if a game moment impacts you long after or beyond the actual play of the game? Do these meaningful play moments always have to be mechanically embedded and expected in the game? So my first PhD study wanted to address this discrepancy, and through interviews and observations with current D&D players, I came up with an adjacent definition of pivotal play, which describes appealing, memorable, and transformative play experiences that transcend game boundaries, resulting in changed attitudes towards non-game topics. So how did I get to this definition? When exploring experiences of meaningful play in D&D throughout my first study, I asked participants the question, what has been your most memorable moment in a D&D game? I found that 85% of these moments were related to death. This was pretty unexpected and overwhelming, as experiences with death in D&D and in games more generally are usually very emotionally heightened and often have negative connotations or emotions attached to them, like grief and sadness. So I was really interested in understanding why death was so prominent and meaningful for D&D players. In their rich explanations, participants described death evocatively. Some of them characterized death as devastating, horrific, brutal, whilst others recalled death as being exciting, powerful, and freeing. These dichotomies of death were further reflected in participants' play experiences, which ranged from tragic and humorous player character and non-player character deaths to experiences of genuine grief and reflection on real-life deaths through in-game death. While I categorize these experiences of death to be meaningful, I felt that the current definition of meaningful play in game studies overlooked the impact of these moments on players beyond the game and was more focused on meaningful game design. From this, I proposed that death in D&D had the potential to be pivotal play, appealing, memorable, and transformative play that transcends game boundaries. The data from this first study emphasized to me that we often unintentionally prioritize understanding or analyzing play experiences that are ideal, intended, or accounted by for the designer. It provoked me to think about what happens when players play games differently to what is expected, or when they make meaning in diverse ways. Can this still be viewed as meaningful play? These lingering questions informed my second study, which wanted to explore the other examples of pivotal play in D&D more broadly, and it led to a deeper exploration of transgressive play experiences. So Jaakko Stenros, a game studies scholar that explores the boundaries of play, provocates that to fully understand play, we need to examine its expressions, if they are valued as positive or negative, regardless of whether they comply with norms or transgress them. If we only look at half the picture, we cannot grasp the whole phenomenon and its nuances. If players are playing games differently to what is expected from them or the norm, they are engaging in transgressive play, which I argue is a widely misrepresented concept in game studies and general media discourse. We know that a transgression is when something goes beyond the limits of what is expected. So what is transgressive play then? Influential game studies scholar and founder of the Game Studies Journal, Espinosa, initially defined transgressive play as the struggle against the game's ideal player. Players that go against the grain of what is expected are usually deemed transgressive. But why is transgression generally framed and discussed negatively? Common examples and discussion of transgressive play often surround things such as griefing, which is when players deliberately disrupt the other player's game experiences, cheating, which is when players exploit limitations of the game or game space in their favor, and even uncomfortable or challenging game content intended to provoke certain reactions and emotions from players. Though there is value in exploring the negative implications of this type of play, we're overlooking the nuance and opportunity for transgressive play to be deeply appealing, memorable, and positively transformative for players. This brings me to the question, can there be positive transgressive play in games? I argue yes, and one of the most salient examples that I've found in Dungeons & Dragons play is something that I've loosely termed creative transgressive play, or play that creatively challenges players and the game space. Unlike many of its video game counterparts that often have predetermined stories, themes, or characters, D&D's flexible rule set gives players creative agency over the game world that they inhabit, allowing them to explore stories and characters that are unique and that cater to their own interests and playing styles. In one of the games that I observed in my second study, players were required to solve a relatively simple logic puzzle to lift a door that would allow them to progress into the next room of the dungeon. Pretty straightforward stuff. However, through excited discussion and collaboration and creativity, players collectively used their fire spells to start burning through the locked wooden door instead of solving the logic puzzle to open it as intended. During the interview reflections, the group's dungeon master, essentially the person who runs the game, indicated that while he hadn't accounted for his players to just simply burn through the door instead of solving the riddle, he had accepted it as a legitimate solution to the issue at hand, and he even praised the creativity of the players, asserting it as a memorable and meaningful moment of the play session. Players in this group had intentionally pushed the game's boundaries, exploited its limitations, and challenged what was expected by the designer of the game, in this case, the DM. Fireballing the door was an act of transgressive play, but not in the way that transgression is currently framed or understood. In Jorgensen and Carlson's 2019 book, Transgression in Games and Play, some common experiences of transgressive play are described and highlighted. But what these D&D players did doesn't really fit any of them. Burning through the door was not one-sided social play. It wasn't dangerous, violent, or parapathic play. It wasn't sensation-centric, context-insensitive, or player inappropriate. Can't really be considered brink play or taboo play or even instrumentalized play. So what is it? I believe that it's creative transgressive play. The embedded flexibility of D&D's rule set combined with the agency that players have over their play and their characters allows them to creatively push the boundaries of the game, and it's even encouraged. However, as D&D is an inherently social, collaborative, and communal shared game space that is navigated in real time by both the players and their characters, players of D&D must be considerate, conscious, and consistently negotiate the trust of the other players in order to safely play with transgression. For example, if one of the players had said, well, I can do anything in D&D, so I'm going to summon an AK-47 gun to blow that door, the other players or the DM probably would have stepped in and shut it down quite quickly. Transgression in D&D relies on the trust and care of other players in the game, which I think makes it inherently different to transgressive play in other games. This also makes D&D a wonderfully rich and unique case study to explore different examples of meaningful, pivotal, and transgressive play. So, how does pivotal and creative transgressive play relate to learning and education? Games, play, and learning have been linked together for many years, and a lot of significant research has been conducted into this area before. I'm not treading any new ground. More recently, however, there is a strong underlying discourse present in both education and game studies literature that often characterizes and bases the success and value of games on their potential as educational and pedagogical tools that have positive impacts. Whilst instrumental applications of games in learning settings like schools are very important and should be continued to be researched, this edification or trend of gamification overlooks other ways that learning in and from games can be valued and integrated into learning. As evidenced in my data from before, players are already engaging with deep and informative learning experiences through the games they play. Here in Australia, but I'm sure it's applicable all over the world as well, across the school curriculum and in all of the key learning areas and subjects, students are encouraged to engage with a variety of different texts and modes that allow them to make meaning in different ways that are imaginative and interpretive and critical and powerful. While there is growing use of research of game-based learning within classrooms, the value of students' leisurely gaming practices and learning experiences outside of the classroom are not really being utilised or considered. As the interest and play of games like D&D continues to increase, it's important that educators and teachers are made aware of and are able to acknowledge and utilise the rich gaming literacies and learning experiences that are already present within the games that their students are consuming and playing. I argue that my definitions of pivotal play and creative transgressive play are a beginning stepping stone into a deeper conversation about how to understand and utilize games for learning. Games offer an enjoyable and social escape from the real world, but more than that, they challenge players to reflect on themselves and their real worlds through the rich learning experiences that are already organically embedded within their games. So what next? I'm about halfway through my PhD, and my final two studies will be exploring these ideas of learning potential, application, and design of pivotal play. My third study will hopefully observe common pivotal play experiences for D&D players in groups under the age of 18, focusing particularly on educational and school-based D&D games. And my fourth and final study draws upon all of my previous studies and findings and is centered around the design of a D&D one-shot that provides players with a pivotal learning experience. Cumulatively, I hope these studies will contribute a framework for game-based learning with D&D, adding to the interdisciplinary discourse surrounding gamification and learning in both serious and leisurely contexts with games. By exploring how meaningful and pivotal play are experienced and understood by a variety of D&D players that play D&D for different purposes and in different play contexts, I hope to be able to offer a deeper understanding about how meaningful learning in games can be designed, experienced, and understood in the future. Thank you so much for listening.